A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my Weird Prompts. I am Corn, and I have to say, looking out over Jerusalem this morning, things feel particularly heavy. The air is clear, the stone is glowing in that early light, but the atmosphere in the city is thick with a kind of tension I have not felt in years. We have got a lot to get into today, and it is a topic that hits very close to home for us.
Herman Poppleberry here. And you are right, Corn. This one is heavy because it is about the very ground we are standing on. Our housemate Daniel sent us a prompt that really cuts through the noise of the daily headlines. It is about a paradox that has been brewing for years, but according to the intelligence reports that dropped just this week, in March of 2026, it has reached a breaking point. We are talking about a fundamental contradiction in how this country survives.
It is what some analysts are calling strategic schizophrenia. It is a jarring term, but it fits. On one hand, you have Israel deepening its economic and diplomatic ties with Russia and China. We see Chinese state-owned enterprises building our ports and Russian diplomats being treated as essential intermediaries in every regional flare-up. But on the other hand, we are now seeing confirmation that these same powers are actively enabling the very threats that keep us up at night. Specifically, the role they are playing in Iran's military capabilities. It is like we are building the gallows for our own execution.
The news from the last few days has been a gut punch. We are seeing reports from major outlets like the Washington Post and CNN confirming that Russia is providing Iran with real-time geolocation data of United States and allied military assets. And China is not just a passive observer either. They are supplying the Beidou-3 satellite surveillance and the YLC-8B stealth tracking radar systems to Tehran. This is not just theoretical competition anymore. This is a direct contribution to a kill chain aimed at us and our allies.
And yet, here we are in Jerusalem, watching the Haifa port operate under Chinese management, and seeing our government maintain this delicate, almost desperate dance with the Kremlin. Today, we want to pick apart this paradox. Why does Israel maintain these relationships while the very powers it is courting are enabling its primary adversary? Is this a masterclass in realism, or are we witnessing a massive failure of strategic foresight?
It is the ultimate balancing act, Corn, but the wire is getting thinner every single day. We have touched on pieces of this before. If you remember episode 555, we talked about walking between raindrops and how Israel navigates the new axis. But back then, the raindrops were not made of precision-guided munitions enabled by Russian satellites. The math has changed. The raindrops have turned into a monsoon of high-tech threats.
It really has. Let us start with the intelligence equation, because that is what is driving the urgency right now. Herman, you have been digging into the specifics of this March 2026 intelligence. What exactly are we looking at when we talk about this Russian and Chinese support for Iran? Because for the average person, a radar system or a satellite constellation sounds abstract.
It is anything but abstract, Corn. It is a massive technical shift. For a long time, the assumption was that Iran's missile program was formidable, but lacked the high-end sensor fusion and real-time data to be truly surgical against mobile targets or stealth assets. That assumption is dead. The reports confirm that Russia is now feeding Iran live geolocation data. Think about what that means. If a United States carrier group moves in the Gulf, or if there is a concentration of troops in a neighboring country, Iran knows exactly where they are in real time. They do not have to rely on their own limited reconnaissance. They are plugging into the Russian military machine.
And then you add the Chinese element to that. The YLC-8B radar. That is the one designed specifically to counter stealth, right? I remember reading that this was the big fear for the Air Force.
Precisely. The YLC-8B is a high-power medium to long-range surveillance radar. It operates in the UHF band, which makes it incredibly effective at detecting low observable platforms. We are talking about the F-35, the Adir. This is the backbone of the Israeli Air Force's qualitative edge. If Iran can track our stealth jets using Chinese hardware, our entire doctrine of air superiority is put at risk. And it is not just the radar. It is the Beidou-3 satellite constellation. It provides Iran with an alternative to GPS that the West cannot jam or switch off. It gives their ballistic missiles a level of precision that makes them far more lethal. We are talking about a move from hitting a city to hitting a specific hangar on an airbase.
This is what is so baffling to me. We know this hardware is being moved. We know the intelligence is being shared. And yet, if you look at the diplomatic calendar, it is almost like business as usual. I keep thinking about that February 2025 United Nations vote. Israel actually broke away from the Western consensus and refused to support a resolution reaffirming Ukraine's territorial integrity. That was a massive signal to Moscow. It was basically saying, we will look the other way on your global transgressions if you keep playing ball with us in the Middle East.
It was a cold, hard calculation. The logic in the Prime Minister's office, and among many of our strategic thinkers, is that Russia is the only power that can effectively restrain Iran and its proxies in Syria. We call it the de-confliction channel. Since Russia has a major military presence in Syria, we have had to coordinate every single airstrike we conduct against Iranian targets there. The fear is that if we alienate Putin, he shuts down that channel, or worse, he starts giving the S-400 air defense codes to the Syrians or the Iranians. It is a form of geopolitical blackmail.
But Herman, isn't that a circular trap? We tolerate Russian support for Iran because we need Russia to help us manage the mess that Iran is making with Russian support. It feels like we are paying protection money to the person who is arming the guy trying to break into our house. It is a feedback loop of vulnerability.
That is exactly what it is, Korn. It is a protection racket on a geopolitical scale, and the argument from the realists is that the alternative is worse. They argue that if Russia leaves Syria, or if they become purely hostile, the vacuum will be filled entirely by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or perhaps by Turkey. They see Russia as a necessary evil, a secular power that, while often at odds with the West, at least speaks the language of statecraft rather than pure religious martyrdom. But, as you said, when that secular power starts providing real-time targeting data for the martyrs, the distinction starts to fade. The secular power is now the force multiplier for the religious extremists.
And then there is the China side of the paradox, which is almost entirely economic, but with massive security implications. We are talking about the SIPG, the Shanghai International Port Group, which operates the Haifa Gulf Port. This is one of our most critical pieces of infrastructure. And it is not just the port. You look at our energy sector. Power China is involved in the Eshkol Avshel power plant. We have Chinese firms in the Kochav Hayadin and Dahlia, 2 projects. These are the literal gears of our country.
It is what I call hostage infrastructure. When you let a state-owned enterprise from a country like China build and operate your primary logistics hubs and your power grid, you are giving them a kill switch. Now, the official line from the Chinese government is always that these are purely commercial ventures. They say, we are just here for the business, we want to build your Belt and Road. But we know there is no such thing as a purely commercial venture for a Chinese state-owned enterprise. They are extensions of the Communist Party's strategic goals. If a conflict breaks out, do we really think the SIPG is going to prioritize Israeli security over Beijing's orders?
It is interesting to compare this to how other countries are handling it. Look at Japan. They passed the Economic Security Promotion Act precisely because they realized that economic entanglement with China was becoming a national security vulnerability. They are actively de-risking. They are moving supply chains. They are being much more protective of their critical infrastructure. Even South Korea, which has a massive economic reliance on China, is starting to harden its stance because they see the writing on the wall. Why is Israel moving in the opposite direction? Or, at least, why are we moving so much slower?
I think it comes down to a sense of isolation. Korn, we have always felt that we cannot afford to have too many enemies at once. If we are at odds with the European Union over policy, and if the United States is going through its own internal political shifts, there is a temptation to look east. There is this idea that China and Russia do not care about the Palestinian issue the way the West does. They do not lecture us on human rights or settlement policy. They are transactional. And for a country that feels constantly under the microscope of Western liberal values, that transactional nature can be very seductive. It feels like a relief to just talk business.
Seductive, sure. But is it sustainable? If you are transactional, but the person on the other side of the table is selling weapons to the guy who wants to wipe you off the map, the transaction is a failure. We are basically funding the research and development of our own destruction through these trade deals. Every shekel that goes into a Chinese port project or a Russian energy deal eventually filters back into a system that is supporting the Iranian military-industrial complex. We are buying the rope, Herman.
You are hitting on the core of the leverage trap. It is not just that they might turn off the lights or close the port, it is that the relationship itself becomes a muzzle. When Russia provides that intelligence to Iran, why isn't there a massive public diplomatic rupture? Why aren't we expelling diplomats? Because we are afraid of what happens in Syria. When China provides the YLC-8B radar, why are we still letting them bid on our light rail projects? Because we are afraid of the economic retaliation. We have traded our freedom of action for a false sense of stability. We have become strategically paralyzed.
It reminds me of what we discussed in episode 861, where we modeled the scenario of Israel's strategic pivot. We are seeing that play out now in 2026. The pivot was supposed to give us more options, but it feels like it has actually narrowed them. We have become more dependent on the goodwill of people who do not actually wish us well. They wish for their own regional dominance, and we are just a piece on the board they are willing to sacrifice if it suits their larger goals with Iran or their broader competition with the United States.
And let us talk about the United States for a second, because that is the third point of the triangle. Our relationship with Washington is our most vital asset. But when we accommodate Russia on Ukraine, or when we let China build strategic ports, we are poking the bear in Washington. There is a growing frustration among American policymakers who see Israel as wanting to have its cake and eat it too. They say, we give you billions in military aid to defend against Iran, but you are letting the people arming Iran build your infrastructure. It creates a massive friction point in the United States-Israel relationship that we simply cannot afford.
It is a statistical earthquake, like we talked about in episode 9181. The pro-Israel consensus in the States is already under pressure. When we make these kinds of geopolitical moves that seem to undermine American strategic interests, we are just handing ammunition to the people who want to distance the United States from Israel. It is a very dangerous game. We are risking the only alliance that actually provides us with a security umbrella for the sake of keeping a port contract with a company that answers to Beijing.
It is. And I think we need to look at the role of the Prime Minister here. Netanyahu has always prided himself on being this grand strategist, the man who can talk to Putin one day and Biden the next, and keep everyone happy. He uses his personal relationship with Putin as a back channel to signal to Iran. He thinks he can manage the situation through sheer force of personality and backroom deals. But the intelligence from this week suggests that Putin is not being managed. Putin is using Netanyahu to keep Israel quiet while he helps Iran build a more effective military machine. It is a one-way street of manipulation.
So, what is the breaking point? At what point does this become untenable? If real-time geolocation of Allied troops being handed to Iran isn't the threshold, what is? If the provision of stealth tracking radars isn't the threshold, what is? It feels like we are moving the goalposts of our own security to avoid a confrontation we are terrified of. We are accepting a higher and higher level of threat just to maintain the status quo.
That is the big question. Some would argue we have already crossed the threshold. When a foreign power is actively enabling a kill chain against your soldiers and your citizens, that is traditionally a casus belli, or at least a reason for a total severance of diplomatic and economic ties. But we are in this weird gray zone world of 2026 where everything is interconnected. We are afraid that a total break would lead to an immediate escalation that we are prepared to handle. We are choosing the slow poison over the surgery.
But are we ever going to be more prepared than we are now? Every day we wait, the Iranian capability gets better thanks to Russian and Chinese help. Every day we wait, China gets more embedded in our infrastructure. Every day we wait, our leverage disappears. It feels like we are choosing a slow-motion disaster over a sharp, painful correction, and the longer we wait, the more painful that correction becomes.
It is the classic innovator's dilemma, but applied to geopolitics. We are so invested in the current model of strategic ambiguity that we cannot see that the model is broken. We need to start thinking about decoupling. Not a total isolation, obviously, but a strategic withdrawal from these deep dependencies. We need to follow the Japanese model. We need to treat infrastructure as a national security issue, not just an accounting issue. If a project is critical to the survival of the state, it should not be built by a state-owned enterprise of a country that is arming our enemies. It is that simple.
It sounds simple when you say it, Herman, but the implementation is a nightmare. You are talking about canceling massive contracts, potentially paying billions in penalties, and facing the diplomatic wrath of Beijing. Are we ready for that? Are we ready for the economic shock that would come with a sudden pivot away from Chinese investment?
We have to be. What is the cost of not doing it? The cost of not doing it is a world where Iran has a precision-guided, satellite-enabled, stealth-detecting military that can hold our entire country hostage. Compared to that, a few billion in contract penalties and some angry diplomats seem like a bargain. We have to stop looking at these things as separate buckets. The trade bucket, the diplomacy bucket, and the security bucket are all the same bucket now. In 2026, there is no such thing as a non-strategic port.
I think that is a really important point for our listeners to grasp. In the modern age, there is no such thing as a purely commercial deal between nations. Every port, every power plant, every satellite agreement is a piece of a larger strategic puzzle, and right now, the puzzle Israel is building looks like a trap. We are building a cage around ourselves and calling it a trade agreement.
It really does. And look, I am not saying we should be looking for a fight with Russia or China. We are a small country. We have to be smart. But being smart means being honest about what is happening. If Russia is providing geolocation data to Iran, they are not our partners in de-confliction. They are participants in the conflict. If China is providing radars to track our jets, they are not just here to build a port. They are here to undermine our defense. We have to call it what it is. We have to stop pretending that we are playing a game of chess when the other side is playing a game of war.
It is a hard truth to swallow, especially for a country that prides itself on its intelligence and its ability to navigate complex environments. It feels like we have been outplayed. We thought we were using them, but they were actually using us to buy time and access while they built up our primary adversary. It is a blow to the national ego, but we have to face it.
It is a lesson in the limits of realism. If your realism doesn't account for the fact that your partners are actively working for your destruction, it isn't realism. It is naivety dressed up in a suit. We need to get back to a foreign policy that is grounded in the reality of who our true allies are. The United States, for all its flaws and internal drama, is the only power that actually shares our fundamental interests in a stable, democratic, and secure Middle East. Russia and China want a world where they can push the United States out. And if that means using Iran as a wrecking ball, they will do it. We are just in the way.
So, what does this look like practically? If you were sitting in the cabinet right now, Herman, what is the first move? How do we begin to untangle this mess without causing a total collapse of our regional standing?
The first move is a total audit of all infrastructure projects involving foreign state-owned enterprises. Any project that has not started yet gets put on hold. Any project that is in progress gets a massive increase in security oversight. And we start the process of diversifying. We look to India, we look to the Gulf states, we look to our own domestic capabilities. We have to stop the bleeding. And diplomatically, we have to end the ambiguity. We need to stand firmly with the West on issues like Ukraine. Not just because it is the right thing to do, though it is, but because we need to rebuild the trust with our actual allies. We need to show that we are a reliable partner, not a double agent.
It would be a massive shift, a total rewiring of our geopolitical DNA, like we talked about in episode 861. But the more I look at the data from this March 2026 report, the more I think there is no other choice. The raindrops have turned into a flood, and we are still trying to use an umbrella.
They really have. And look, I want to be clear. This isn't about being anti-Russian or anti-Chinese in a vacuum. It is about responding to their actions. If they want a better relationship with Israel, they can start by not arming the regime that calls for our annihilation. Until they do that, any economic or diplomatic cooperation is just a form of self-sabotage. We are not the ones who change the rules of the game, they are.
I wonder how much of this is also driven by internal politics here. There is a certain segment of the population that likes the idea of Israel being this independent power that doesn't have to answer to Washington. There is a pride in saying, we can talk to anyone, but that pride can be very expensive if it blinds you to the reality of the situation. It is a form of hubris.
Pride often comes before a fall, corn. And in geopolitics, the fall can be catastrophic. We have to be humble enough to realize that we cannot balance the world on our own. We need a coalition of like-minded states that are committed to a specific kind of global order. Russia and China are trying to build a different order, one where might makes right and where regional hegemons like Iran are given free rein as long as they serve the interests of the great powers in Moscow and Beijing. That is not a world where Israel thrives. That is a world where Israel is a nuisance to be managed.
It is a sobering thought. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at the next round of infrastructure contract renewals very closely. That is going to be the real barometer. If we see another major project go to a Chinese state-owned enterprise after these intelligence reports, then we know the policy hasn't changed. We know the government is still doubling down on this paradox. We will know that the short-term convenience is still outweighing the long-term survival.
And that should be a signal to every citizen that our security is being traded for short-term economic or diplomatic convenience. It is something we all need to be vocal about. We cannot let these deals happen in the dark. They need to be debated in the Knesset. They need to be scrutinized by the press, and they need to be understood by the public. This is not just a matter for the experts, it is a matter for everyone who lives here.
Well, that is why we do this show, right? To shine a light on these weird prompts and the even weirder realities they represent. This has been a heavy one, but I think it is one of the most important conversations we have had in a long time. It is about the fundamental question of what kind of country we want to be and who we want to stand with.
I agree. It is about the future of our home. And if we aren't willing to look at the hard truths, we won't have a future to worry about. We have to be willing to see the world as it is, not as we wish it were.
On that note, I think we have given everyone a lot to chew on. If you are listening to this and you are as concerned as we are, or if you think we are missing a key piece of the puzzle, we want to hear from you. This is a conversation that needs to happen in every corner of our society.
Definitely. And if you have been enjoying the show, or even if you are just finding us through this episode, please take a moment to leave a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It really does help other people find these discussions. We are at nearly 1,000 episodes now, and it is the support from our listeners that keeps us going. We are trying to build a community of people who care about the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is.
You can find all our past episodes, including the ones we referenced today, like episode 555 and 861, at our website, myweirdprompts.com. There is a search bar there, so you can dive into our archive on any topic we have covered. We are also on Spotify, so make sure to follow us there for new episodes every week.
And a big thank you to Daniel for sending this in. It was a tough one, but a necessary one. We live in a complicated part of the world, and sometimes you have to lean into the complexity to find the truth. Daniel always seems to find the prompts that hit the hardest.
We will be back next week with another prompt, hopefully something a little lighter, but you never know with Daniel. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking the hard questions. Don't take the official narrative at face value.
This has been My Weird Prompts. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.
Wait, Herman, I just thought of one more thing before we go. We didn't really touch on the cyber aspect of this. If China is operating the port, they aren't just managing physical containers. They are managing the data flow of our entire logistics network.
Oh, Corn, that is a whole other hour of conversation. The signal intelligence they can gather just by being physically present in the Haifa Bay is astronomical. They can track the movement of every naval vessel, every supply ship, everything. It is a massive intelligence vacuum cleaner sitting right in our backyard. They don't even need to hack us. We gave them the keys to the front door.
It just reinforces the point, doesn't it? There is no such thing as just a port. Everything is a node, everything is a sensor.
Not in 2026. Not ever really, but especially not now. Everything is a node in a network. And if you don't own the node, you don't own your security. You are just a guest in your own country.
That is the perfect place to end it. The node is the message.
Precisely. All right, now we are really going.
Take care, everyone.
Shalom from Jerusalem.
Herman, you always have to have the last word, don't you?
It is a donkey thing, Corn. You wouldn't understand.
See you later. See you later.
Bye.
One more thing. No, I am just kidding. We are done.
Good, because I have a lot of reading to do on those radar specs.
I bet you do. Go get 'em, Herman Poppleberry.
Will do. Talk soon.
All right, for real this time. Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. Check out myweirdprompts.com for more. Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts.